For the last 11 months of his life, Malcolm X stopped asking America for anything. He went to Africa instead. Not to visit, he sat down with presidents. Nasser in Egypt, Nkrumah in Ghana, Sekou Touré in Guinea, and he asked them all for the same thing. He asked them to bring the United States of America before the United Nations and charge it with crimes against 22 million black Americans. In July of 1964, in Cairo, he put that request in front of the assembled heads of state of an entire continent in writing, 8 pages, and they didn't laugh at him. They passed a resolution. 11 months later, he was dead at 39. And within a single generation, the most sophisticated political strategist Black America ever produced had been flattened into 4 words in a textbook. He was the angry one. That's not an accident. That's the job getting done. Because here's the thing about the story you were told. You know the shape of it. Martin was the peaceful one and Malcolm was the angry one. Martin wanted us to sit together and Malcolm wanted us to separate. Martin said, love your enemy, and Malcolm said, by any means necessary. One of them got a holiday and a monument on the National Mall. The other one got to be the warning, the man who went too far, the one they bring up to make the first one look reasonable. And then the story goes, he went to Mecca, he softened, he changed his mind about white folks, and not long after that, his own people killed him over a religious argument. Sad, tragic. Turn the page, class. Almost none of that is true, and the part that is true has been arranged to hide something. Let me put the last year of his life back in order, and I want you to watch how fast it moves. March 1964. Malcolm X leaves the Nation of Islam. Understand what he was giving up? He had been its voice for more than a decade. He walked into temples with a dozen people sitting in them and left them overflowing. Membership went from a few hundred to tens of thousands, and he is the reason. He built that. And he walked away from all of it, knowing exactly how dangerous walking away would be. But leaving did something that almost nobody around him saw coming. For 12 years, Malcolm had been speaking inside a theology. The nation had a doctrine, it had a separatist program, and it had a standing instruction that its members stay out of politics completely. No voting, no marching, no coalitions, no alliances. Malcolm X spent 12 years being the most gifted orator in America inside a box that would not let him act. In March of 1964, the box came off. And what he did with that freedom was not soften. It was the opposite. He escalated, just not in the direction anybody was watching. In April, he made the pilgrimage to Mecca. And yes, something happened to him there. He prayed shoulder to shoulder with men who had blue eyes and blonde hair, and he wrote home, publicly, honestly in his own handwriting, that it forced him to reconsider a blanket judgment he had been carrying about an entire race of people. That much of the story is real, but the story always stops right there, every time. Because if you stop there, Malcolm X becomes a nice little parable about a hard man learning tolerance. And that is a Malcolm X who is safe to teach. That is not what he came back with. He came back with a map because he didn't only go to Mecca. Across 1964, he spent close to half the year outside the United States, in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Guinea, Algeria, Morocco. He was not sightseeing and he was not on a spiritual retreat. He was meeting heads of state. He addressed the Ghanaian parliament. He was received in capital after capital, not as an activist, not as a preacher, but as something much closer to an ambassador, a man representing a people. And in every one of those rooms, he made one specific argument. It is the sharpest thing he ever said, and it is the reason he is not with us. He had figured out something about a word. He said, "We have been fighting for civil rights, and civil rights is a domestic matter. Civil rights is a question of what the United States government chooses to hand its own citizens inside its own borders. As long as this stays a civil rights struggle, America is the judge in America's own trial. You are standing in a courtroom asking the man with his boot on your neck to please rule that he should not have his boot on your neck. There is no higher court. There is nowhere to appeal to. He owns the building. But human rights is something else entirely. Human rights belongs to the United Nations. Human rights is what the whole world had just spent 20 years writing charters and declarations about in the smoking wreckage of a war fought against a government that did unspeakable things to people inside its own borders. Human rights is the exact machinery that the world was at that very moment using to drag South Africa out into the open and call apartheid what it was. So Malcolm X proposed to do to the United States of America what the world was doing to South Africa. That was the plan. Not a protest, not a boycott, a charge. He intended to stand the United States in front of the United Nations and accuse it of the systematic violation of the human rights of 22 million people. And to do that, he needed sponsors. He needed independent African and Asian nations, brand new countries, most of them free for less than a decade, now holding seats and votes in that building in New York to bring the charge on behalf of Black America. That is what all the travel was for. He was whipping votes. In June of 1964, he founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Look at the name. It is deliberately built to echo the Organization of African Unity, because that is precisely what it was. He was constructing the American chapter of a body that already existed on the other side of the ocean. And then in July, he flew to Cairo, where the Organization of African Unity was holding its summit. And he got himself admitted as an observer, and he handed the gathered leaders of an entire continent that 8-page memorandum. He told them the American Negro's problem would never be solved as long as the world kept treating it as America's private business. He told them their own dignity was tied to his, that no African head of state would ever be truly respected anywhere on earth, while Black people in America were being beaten in the street and hosed down on television. He asked them to stop being polite about it. And Cairo answered him. The Organization of African Unity passed a resolution that summer formally recording its deep concern over racial discrimination in the United States. It was not the full charge he had asked for, but it was the first crack in the wall, and Malcolm knew exactly what he was holding. In a matter of months, he had taken a domestic protest movement and turned it into a foreign policy crisis. Washington understood immediately. Remember what year this is, 1964. The Cold War is at full heat, and the single most effective piece of propaganda the Soviet Union has anywhere in Africa or Asia is a photograph of an American police dog with his teeth in a Black child in Alabama. The United States is spending fortunes telling newly independent nations that it is the leader of the free world and the natural friend of people who have just thrown off colonial rule. And here is one man with no army and no money moving from capital to capital, sitting across the table from their presidents, asking them to file charges. He had stopped asking for a seat at the lunch counter. He was asking for jurisdiction. And this is the point where you need to understand how close they were standing to him. When the shooting started in the Audubon Ballroom on the afternoon of February 21st, 1965, one of the men who ran toward Malcolm, one of his own security detail, knelt down and began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. His name was Gene Roberts. He was an undercover officer with the New York Police Department's Bureau of Special Services, and he had been reporting on Malcolm X for months. They were inside the room. They were inside his security. Somebody standing in that ballroom knew where the exits were, knew the routine, knew who was carrying and who wasn't, and was writing it all down and handing it in. And that is only the piece we can name. The FBI had opened a file on Malcolm back in the early 1950s, and it never closed. Thousands of pages. That is the pressure he was operating under while he was flying to Cairo. Now watch the last few weeks. He comes home from Africa in November of 1964. He spends that winter speaking in Harlem, in Detroit, in London, telling anyone who will listen exactly what he intends to do and roughly when. He says out loud more than once that he expects to be killed. On February 14th, 1965, his house in Queens is firebombed in the middle of the night with his wife and 4 little girls asleep inside. They get out. 7 days later, he is dead, 39 years old. From the day he walked out of the Nation of Islam to the day he was shot, less than a year. 3 men were convicted. One of them, Talmadge Hayer, admitted his part almost right away and then said, from prison under oath again and again for decades, that the other 2 men convicted beside him had nothing to do with it. He named other people. Nobody moved. Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson, who later took the names Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam, served 42 years between them for a murder they said from the very first day they did not commit. In November of 2021, after a 22-month reinvestigation, their convictions were thrown out. The investigation found that the FBI and the New York Police Department had been holding evidence that pointed to their innocence and never turned it over, including material that would have backed up their alibis, and including the presence of undercover officers. The Manhattan District Attorney stood up in open court and apologized. Muhammad Aziz was 83 years old and heard it with his own ears. Khalil Islam died in 2009. He never heard it at all. 56 years. That is how long it took for an American courtroom to admit that the official account of Malcolm X's death was built on evidence the government was sitting on. And I need you to hold this carefully, because it would be easy to leave here with a shrug and a conspiracy and a bad feeling in your chest. That is not what this is. Every single thing I have told you is on paper. The 8 pages are on paper. The Cairo resolution is on paper. The surveillance files are on paper. The vacated convictions are public record from 4.5 years ago, and you can read the filing yourself tonight. None of it is hidden. It is simply not taught. And that is the harder lesson, and it is the one I actually want you to walk out with. Nobody had to ban Malcolm X. You do not need to ban a man when you can flatten him, when you can take the 11 most strategically brilliant months in the history of Black American politics and shrink them down to he was the angry one. And then let a country's teachers repeat it for 60 years until it is simply what everybody knows. He wasn't killed because he was angry. Angry was fine. Angry was manageable. Angry stayed inside the borders and burned itself out on a street corner. He was killed the year he stopped asking America for anything and started building a case against it in front of the world. He wasn't angry, he was winning.